So the scramble and the partition of East Africa, that's very, very intentional. So our question, this is the lead explanation. So in this kind of arrangement, we need to understand the scramble and partition. In other words, our question, to what extent did the humanitarian factors lead to the scramble and partition of East Africa? So we are saying scramble and partition was about scrambling and the competition for colonies, in this case in East Africa, where great countries like Britain, Germany were scrambling to get colonies. But we need to know the role of the humanitarian factors. So we are saying slave trade had horrified many Europeans who felt that East Africa must be occupied if this practice was to be put to an end. So we are saying in East Africa at one time there was a slave trade. So the colonialists had to scramble and partition of East Africa in a bid to stop slave what? Slave trade. They thought that they are coming, they were going to stop slave what? Trade. And this explains why they had to come. Then they needed to spread Christianity. These are humanitarian factors. So we are saying they needed to spread Christianity. The colonialists in their agenda wanted to spread Christianity because at first in East Africa, Islam had been spread. So by this, these people wanted to spread Christianity. Change is rising up. Another one, they needed to spread Western civilization or Western education. The colonialists in their agenda, they wanted to spread Western civilization or Western education. In other words, they are coming, they were going to teach people how to read and write. And this meant promoting their influence. Then they need to abolish slave trade and establish legitimate trade. Because many people are dealing in slave trade, in these people's agenda, they wanted to abolish slave trade and come up with legitimate trade. So in this kind of arrangement, those were under humanitarian factors. But still, we have other factors that led to the scramble and partition of East Africa. Among them, economic factors or industrial revolution and its effects. We believe by this time, it was a question of the economic factors or industrial revolution. As industries rose up in Europe, these people wanted to get raw materials to be used in their what? Industries. So they decided to scramble and partition of East Africa so that they could control East Africa and get what they needed, like raw materials to be used in their industries. Then the need for areas of investment in East Africa. These colonialists, one of the reasons why there was the scramble and partition of East Africa was that the need for areas of investment. They wanted to get areas where they were going to invest. They claimed that they had invested in Europe and it was all over. So they wanted other areas for what? Investment. That's why they had to come to East Africa. Then the need for market for surplus products. We believe by this time, since they had industries, they were producing so many things. So by this, they wanted the market for surplus products. By conquering East Africa could mean that they could bring things from Europe and sell them in East Africa. That's why there was the scramble and the partition. Then the need for raw materials by the European industries. It is said the industrial owners in Europe wanted raw materials, so they put pressure on their countries, let's say Britain, to get colonies so that they could get raw materials at a very cheap what? Price. Another one, the role of the chartered companies, Ibeco and Giyako. Imperial British East African Company. These companies persuaded the Europeans to come in East Africa and colonize it because for them, they had seen already East Africa. So they took information to the lead countries that East Africa was a great country for investment. That's why they had to come anyway. Then the discovery of minerals in South Africa in the 19th century. As minerals were discovered in South Africa, gold and diamond in South Africa, this inspired the colonials to come to East Africa. They thought that as the minerals were discovered in South Africa, still East Africa was going to have what? Minerals. That's why they had to come. Then, strategic reasons, Britain was obsessed with the security of our interests in India. Britain thought that controlling East Africa could protect her interests in where? In India. That's why the British had to come. Then the British occupation of Egypt in 1882. So in this kind of arrangement, as the British occupied Egypt in 1882, this led to the scrum and partition of East Africa. Since they occupied Egypt, they wanted also to add East Africa so that they had to control a very big area. Then the strategic importance of the Nile. So Uganda being the source of River Nile, these people thought that to control the Nile, they had to control countries in East Africa like Uganda because they wanted to be in control of River Nile. Then they need to take over Kenya and access to the Indian Ocean. Of course, they wanted also to take over Kenya. Since Kenya was in East Africa, they ended up scrambling and partitioning East Africa. Then racial jingoism or Darwinism theory. There was a man called Darwin. He brought a theory called survival for the fittest. For him, he was claiming the fittest person is supposed to dominate the game. So it was the Darwinism theory that made the British, the Germans, to scrum and partition of East Africa. Because the more colonies the country had, the more supremacy that country was supposed to be. That's why there was the scramble and the partition. Then we have some political factors. The unification of Germany and Italy. As there was unification of Germany and Italy, this meant by this time that Europeans had an agenda of promoting their what? Nationalism, love for one's country. As the Germans succeeded, the Italians succeeded, these Europeans wanted to extend nationalism in other areas because they believed that nationalism was a great concept that could make them to conquer areas. Then the activities of King Leopold II in Congo. I can say Leopold II conquered so many areas in where? In Congo. By the way, even they created a district called Leopoldville. A man conquered the district. So by this time, and all land in that district belonged to him. Leopoldville. So by this, as Leopold succeeded in Congo, it is this that inspired the British to occupy East Africa. They thought that they were going to succeed as also Leopold did what? Succeeded. Then the role of the Berlin Conference of 1884-25. What happened in Berlin? Otto von Bismarck, a lead thinker, called the Berlin what? Conference, where all European countries were invited, the lead ones were invited, and they started sharing Africa as if they were sharing a piece of cake. So it was the Berlin Conference of 1884-85 that led to the scrum and partition of East Africa. Because in Berlin, they were given a go-ahead to control so many areas in Africa. Another one, the role of explorers and missionaries who provided vital information about East Africa. The explorers and missionaries provided